Welcome, party people, to the fourth episode of the fifth season of Law and Candor. Fourth episode of the fifth season. Insane. This podcast is wholly devoted to the pursuing the legal technology revolution. As you all know, I am Bill, and I'm here with my co-host Rob, and we are excited to have you all here today. We want to get into the portion of the program that we know our listeners enjoy and we enjoy, and that is the
Sightings of Radical Brilliance.
This is the portion of the program where we bring you the latest news of noteworthy innovation and acts of sheer genius. Rob, what do we have today?
You know, Bill, sometimes our sightings are a little bit random and maybe don't connect with our legal audience, but this one definitely will. This is about Relativity, which of course is a document review platform that I think everyone in our industry is at least familiar with, and kind of a new use for it. Again, you know, a lot of our sightings are focused on COVID-related matters, of course. And in this one, you know, could Relativity be used to sort and sift through tens of thousands of, medical journal articles on COVID and help sort of narrow that down into a more, relevant subset, depending on, like what the indication or the language involved would be?
Yeah, we found this one on Above the Law, and it's how e-discovery software is helping battle COVID-19. Pretty dramatic title, but it's playing a role, right? And the article specifically cites how Maura Grossman and Gordon Cormack, two people that you're probably familiar with if you're an industry veteran, are using Relativity to sift through large collections of discovery documents and helping medical staff more quickly search through massive databases of COVID-related clinical studies.
It's kind of funny, I think if you asked a lot of, attorneys in our industry, how comfortable are you with AI and how do you use that in your practice? Most would probably say they don't really use it. But these are tools that are embedded in platforms like Relativity. And I think seeing it used for a purpose that's slightly different, in this case, kind of sifting down to relevant articles, is really pretty similar to what you do in a legal case. You start with a lot of data.
Yeah, and I think that, in the hands of a seasoned pro and like Maura and Gordon are, to them, this is old hat, right? They are very familiar with Relativity. They're very familiar with e-discovery technology, obviously. But we were talking about this before the show where sometimes you'll hear about other industries completely unrelated to the legal technology industry. And they'll say, well, we produced over 1 million documents or over 100,000 documents. And they do this in the press to make it sound like a lot of data. Us in the e-discovery industry, we know that is not a lot of data. That said, there are applications that we use. There are technologies and functionalities that we use every day in our business that could be, put to other use. In this case, helping doctors and researchers to sift through, tens of thousands of pages of journal and clinical studies to find the ones that are most relevant to helping people to drive towards a cure with COVID.
It's kind of funny, I would never have guessed that there were over 52,000 COVID-19 articles already, but apparently there are. They were able to segment those by language, by patient. I think they were specifically looking for pediatric applications. But yeah, good to see that our technology is impacting other fields and doing good.
Yeah, it's nice to be associated with something good. I'm not doing anything, so it's nice to be associated with other people that are doing good, and I'm happy to at least be sort of related to it. So nice job by Maura and Cormack and Relativity in using something that we all use every day in furtherance of this, of helping to find a cure and study and research COVID.
Great.
Fantastic.
Well, on to the meat of our podcast today, and I think this is going to be a fantastic one. We had the pleasure of bringing Nicki Woodfall of Travers Smith to discuss uncovering effective strategies for managing DSARs. We hope you'll stay tuned and listen to the interview. Nikki, maybe just to get us started, could you give us a little bit of history about yourself? Anything interesting you want to share with our audience?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Nicki Woodfall. I'm the e-disclosure, e-data manager at Travers Smith. I've been there now for just under 3 years, and we've been working alongside a variety of departments within Travers Smith itself. We are the technical team that support with disclosure, whether that be litigious, SARs, our most favorite things, and of course other swapping and sharing of data and making sure that we're keeping within the practices that keep it safe, secure, but also defensible.
And Nikki, just a couple of really important preliminary questions. One, maybe the most important is, I hear people say DSAR and I hear people say DSAR. Since you're the definitive expert on this, which one is correct?
Ouch. I think it depends on who the client is and what they prefer to say. I've heard quite a variety of SAR or CSARs as well, or DSARs, DEESERs. There's certainly not a one size fits all, and that goes back to pre-GDPR as well. I think everyone's got their own version.
But I think if you're in a position that you're in, you can be the definitive word on this. Plus, anything said with an English accent sounds better and sounds like it's the proper thing. So I think right now we could just put this all to bed, and you could just decide what it's going to be.
Yeah. Well, and that wasn't, like the other important question is like Nikki, from listening to the podcast that sometimes Bill makes fun of me, but he said that DSAR actually stands for do something about Rob, because there was a problem that I had with the EU. Is there any truth to that?
Again, I think the answer is it depends on the client. I will answer for Nikki here.
Yeah,
I think
agree as well.
Depends on the law enforcement agency. Sure.
Yeah. So, let's call it DSARs for now, and let's talk about the frequency with which we're starting to see this in the past few years. Nikki, in your opinion, why are we seeing more?
I think first and foremost, it's that it was advertised. I would say pre-GDPR, one of the things that DSAR was used for is that there was this wonderful thing, in particular in the UK, with that you had to wait for the nominal check that was £10. The awareness really of what a DSAR or a SAR, a subject access request, really was for, was less known. Then in the run-up to GDPR being in action, as it were, there was a lot of, not only in our industry, discussion of that, but there was a lot of advertising for the different data regulatory protectors. And I suppose it became more of a tool of people understanding their electronic or digital footprint. People, I suppose, were more commonly aware of freedom of information requests, and for journalists in particular, it's something that is used quite regularly. But for individuals and knowing their rights, I just don't think it was really something that somebody took action on. The other key part that I've certainly seen, and even more recently, is the fact that when people are going through times of trauma, or there are changes in the world or the system that they are part of, it's one of the points where Google becomes amazing to find out what somebody can and can't do against, whether it be their employer or somebody in which they have interacted with. And we don't all really understand what our legal obligations are, especially with data that we own. And most people don't really understand the fact that we own our own physical understanding, whether that be our name, date of birth, and so forth. And it has become more of a practical, objective issue for key consumers, both UK and internationally, of I'm traveling to Europe, so I want to know who's held onto my data and really what they're doing with it. But in particular, it really is the fact that the £10 check is just not there anymore. It's 30 days now instead of the glorious days of 40. And the fact that electronic data really is so much more part of our lives than it used to be.
Nikki, that like here in the US, we don't really understand concepts like privacy when it comes to our data. But for the rest of the world, what are some of the top challenges that you're seeing when it comes to actually managing the DSAR process?
Number one, that I've had on a number of these is what constitutes personal data. So privacy of such is somebody actually understanding what should be kept private, and in that effect, how they're doing so. So understanding that somebody's name is attached to them, and effectively, if we give it like a key marker, that is their code, that is their reflection point on that you could identify them anywhere and everywhere. But because we quite openly parade ourselves, to put it nicely, on social media, including things like LinkedIn, Facebook, Snapchat, most wonderful thing ever, we openly give away our ability of privacy not really being there anymore. So the first thing is people actually understanding what's my personal data. Not only the passport information, my telephone number, my email address, and that constituting of personal data is certainly what we have from a legal perspective, but also a technology perspective. The movement that I suppose we've seen in the last year or so is the fact that there's also so many data repositories for SARS. And to go back to some of your earlier podcasts about chat data, and internationally for different locations, the different requirements of collecting that data. And if it's not in a cloud repository or have the ability to be able to collect it or access it from a cloud-based system, if you are then having to travel to said country, you've then got an additional challenge of time. Time is always against you under these certain points. You are trying to bring together the right people to access the data. You then have to collect the data, and you have to actually make sure that you're allowed to get the data in the first place. Can I access somebody else's personal data? And if I am, do I need to tell them? Do I need to manage it a certain way? And the final big challenge, I suppose, that it affects all of us is security. We then have to transfer that data from one place to another. But what if there is already an underlying issue with the company that we're taking that data from or that we're taking it to? What if they are watching for these types of requests because they know it holds such tantalizing data somewhere within it that they can use for one reason or another? Ultimately, we are encapsulating, when collecting all of this data and presenting it, targeted, very, very sensitive information that ultimately becomes this pot of gold for anybody that wants it.
This sounds like a ridiculously complex balancing act. And it also reminds me why I will never apply for a job as a CISO in any large organization keeping data. In your experience then, with all of these balls in the air that we're trying to juggle to make sure that first we know what is private data, then we know we can access it, can we access it, can we move it, all of these different things that you're talking about in terms of challenges, how do you even start to begin to overcome them? How do you put a process in place to begin to overcome them?
Step number one is always know your timeline. So the original SAR or the request that will come from the original individual, it will state the day in which they're sending the letter. And then there is the process of actually acknowledging and agreeing the further steps, whether it be the fact that they have requested an awful amount of data. There will be a negotiation as to whether it is the provider of such will take the extended period of which can be up to 2 months. Keeping that, whether it be on a whiteboard, whether it be reminders in your calendar, or whether it be a color-coded, beautiful Excel that we certainly have, it doesn't matter, but you must always be aware of day one, that clock ticking starts very quickly, and you have to consider the process of getting the data with all of the checks within it, of actually moving it from country to country or from location to location, QCing it, processing it, then analyzing it, and then doing actually all of the work to isolate the information that you're actually looking for, the personal data itself. So that's a big element there of timeline check. When have you got to give that data over, and where are you working up to? The next key one I would say is actually know your audience. So what is the DSAR a reaction to? Is it because there has been an issue with work? Is it in format of a grievance, as an example? Or is it because they genuinely want to know what data you hold on them? So understanding that in particular will allow you to format your end presentation of that information to them. Because, and hopefully not everybody wants 1,000 pages of PDF beautifulness with lots and lots of redactions all over it. They may want a spreadsheet that actually details their name, the email addresses that you have on record for them, the telephone numbers, etc. And even if you're collecting geo-tagging location on them, they'll want to know, and they'll have a nice simple table for that. So definitely number 2 is what's the DSAR in a reaction to? And the final point is, when you're using technology, use the right one. And it may sound like a really simple one, but the technologies that we have access to, especially within the e-disclosure world now, are elaborate. So sentiment analysis is one I know that is discussed quite regularly, especially when it comes to SARS, for the fact that it's supposed to, I suppose, alleviate the struggle of searching through lots and lots of historic documents. But what if all of your hard copy scans? That might not work because it won't be able to OCR the documents correctly, or it might not OCR them correctly. Another point within that is that if you're collecting lots of email data, that whether it be legacy or even of a newer cloud-based collection process, you'll want to invoke those wonderful things like email threading, and where possible, put on all of the highlights that can be shown under the sun, so that actually not only are you able to analyze that data fully, but you're able to present it back to your review team super easily, if you even need a review team. And without elaborating further into all of the parts of technology, the administrative point of view of all of these challenges, technology cost is always going to be associated with it. And you're always going to want to fit this into a tight time bracket, and therefore cost racks up very, very quickly. So number one is timeline in check. 2, know what the DSAR is in reaction to. And 3, know your technology and choose your technology wisely, just because that's the easiest way for you to simplify that process, make it repeatable, and actually have an audit track that allows you to explain to the client what you've done, the regulatory body if you need to, and importantly, client on every step from the very beginning.
Nikki, just a practical question. A lot of our listeners know that Bill spent a year backpacking through Europe after college. I know for a fact that he gave his phone number out to a lot of people during that time. Does he really have an expectation to privacy? I mean, can we just agree that number is out there?
I think forever and ever now.
And the problem, of course, is I have never changed that number. So I still get people hanging up on the other side of the line, and my wife's starting to get really weird about it. But, we're talking 20 years ago. No, what am I saying? 36 years ago. Wow.
Nikki, this has been great. Maybe just to wrap up, a few key takeaways. We're definitely seeing a big rise in the amount of DSARs. We think a lot of that's driven by, just desire that people have to kind of know what their data footprint is out there. Some of the key challenges that companies are having to deal with is, having to really put together a pretty complex response in a very limited amount of time. Having a process for that, is key. Knowing your audience so that when you format that response, it's appropriate to, what drove the person's interest in knowing. And of course, keeping things like cost and, using the right technology, are key points as well. This has been a great session. There really is just a tremendous amount of interest in DSARs, around here. And we really, really appreciate you coming on the podcast and taking the time to walk us through this.
Nikki, I have to say, I learned a lot on this podcast. I often do. And this one I learned quite a bit. And I will be able to relay a lot of information to my clients. And maybe most of all is that it is DSAR. We are calling it DSAR. And I will cite Nikki Woodfall as the person who actually just set in stone, this is what we're calling it from this point forward. And so if anybody calls it anything else, I'm going to give them your number and your email address. Both, I know, private information, but I'm going to give them both, and we'll take it from there. You'll set them straight.
We could probably just post that on the podcast.
Yeah, yes, her phone number and her email. We should
right.
post that on the podcast. I think that'll right with the link. I think that'll be perfect. And we'll say that she prefers calls on Sundays. We'll put underneath in the boilerplate. Nikki, thanks for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Nikki.
Okay, guys, if you are a fan of this podcast, and I know absolutely all of you are, please hit the subscribe button, like it, smash it, throw something at it, make sure you subscribe. It really helps us out. Also, leave a comment. Love to hear your reviews. Thanks a lot. Hope you're enjoying the program.